name is Micaiah Stevens. Welcome to Hamlet Development Log number 13. So, we've been talking a little bit about just a few advertisements possible. We've been talking about some future things, Patreon, Discord. I think a lot of these are just long-term, sort of how to build the studio and interact with the community more. But we really are focused on getting something a little bit more presentable for people, and so that's kind of where we're focused on right now. Anyway, so we are still kind of on this sooner approach to the status report. These it felt like a good time at the time, but we're on the 0.8 live branch and the 0.10 on the beta branch. We talked about a lot about the fact that we could just push the beta branch to the live branch, and that felt like a good thing. But we worked on a lot of other things instead. I think part of it is just kind of having, well, then we wouldn't have a beta branch at that point, which okay, I guess at some point. We did the 12th, log 12 on the 29th. It's been a week. We're still pretty good about that. I think we're a tad late. This is due in a couple hours. So, anyways, we started this actually on May 2nd, which is actually Monday-ish. Pretty early on in the week. We're kind of making some changes over for the weekend, finishing up some weekend work, and then we just kind of was like, hey, we have some interest, and then so we kind of gave this a thought. But for the week there, so what is that sort of thought? Anyway, so we're talking about the sort of some of the major changes, sort of are kind of the idea here. Release path is sort of this idea, more so. We haven't really fleshed that out yet, but sort of figured out what exactly that entails. Basically, it just means, hey, we need to ship the current project as is, and then talk about future. Most of this is about future goals, and then we're still kind of thinking about that goal to ship. Let's see. So we're just kind of in this in development phase. We're coming soon. It's kind of still in testing. A lot of this. I think a lot of this is sort of this testing sort of idea, or what's in development, what's coming soon is really in flux right now. Someone was asking about dungeons from my programming channel, and because I talked about dungeons a while ago, we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But it's just like there's a lot of things like I'm definitely testing out, like how do I do dungeons, what do I want to do with them, but we'll kind of see that. So kind of the major changes is kind of the goal for the change though is sort of how do we ship, which is kind of the overarching plan, and then we sort of have to say, we're working on some future stuff here. I've been doing a lot with GitHub, just because this week's been kind of slow for that. I'm still kind of thinking about this shipping that first, because it's such a strange thing where it's like we're not really having a lot of people clamoring for updates, and we're kind of really small still. So it's kind of my own personal, hey, I haven't updated in a month or two, why not? And it's kind of that sort of thing. Anyway, so let's talk about the major changes. We talked a little bit about this last time, but and so it's not really, this is not the major changes part, like, so hopefully a lot of these are spelled correctly. I kind of put this together on Monday. I hadn't really talked about it, looked at it a lot of sense. So anyways, we talked about the in game development for games, you kind of have the pillars, various pillars that your game's going to be built on. And we so it's not really new that we kind of talking about these ideas that we have. Let's kind of go from the bottom up, or these are kind of more laid out as pillar 1, pillar 2, and pillar 3, but for demo purposes, I thought this would be it's kind of more like a Venn diagram of the characters interact with the economy, and then or the characters interact with the dungeon and such a level, and then you have this economy interacting with the character. I don't think the town really interacts, well, the town actually does sort of interact with the dungeon on its own level. And then sort of in the center here is the game. But yeah, so the dungeons are sort of like, we've been talking quite a bit about this, and sort of how I think this is kind of meant to be also, this is kind of how we were organizing it before. Like, hey, dungeons are sort of this idea, like in a traditional roguelike or rogue, you start out in a town. Well, you build a character, which starts out in a town, which goes into a dungeon, which builds up your character, and then goes back to the town to sort of, use that economy to, go deeper and deeper into the dungeon. But, we're kind of thinking about the dungeon as, yeah, that's kind of a piece of the puzzle that we'd like. And it sort of adds this idea that, well, in dungeons, maybe in the overworld too, we'll have combat. It's not just to limit the idea, but these do seem to be linked quite a bit. But it's sort of more like the interactions of the characters. Like right now, you either move forward to interact with the character, or you left click on the character and then right click on something. And traditionally, so we're gonna have to see how that sort of. But anyway, so that's sort of this idea, like, oh, it's sort of clumped together before, and then we have the character, which has stats and items, etc. Equipment, just also everything sort of intrinsic to the character, which are sort of characters are also kind of like entities, which we'll talk a little bit about here shortly. It's sort of this. It's not the main player character or the player character. Character is just sort of this idea. Sort of this person in the world, but it's sort of how that person looks. And we have some test characters right now, and then so that feeds kind of into this economy. The town really might be a better. We should swap these a little bit. In fact, we'll do that right now. So it's sort of more thinking of like the town feeds this economy is fed into this town, and but that's sort of so the town is this idea. Let me get back to this, where it's like this economy, and it's coming along nicely because we're making improvements more for the character. These are sort of linked in sort of their ideas of, which I should probably talk a little bit about that in terms of, sort of where we're at. Let's see, how would I want to do this? But so a little live testing here. So we kind of think of this idea of these three. We have entities, and then you have this idea of characters, I think you'd call it. Well, characters are. Whoa, why did you not? Yeah, there we go. I think I copied but didn't paste. So characters are kind of more over here. Like this is the traditional RPG character. With stats, stats are strength maybe. So it's sort of strength and then items based on that. So and it's not really like, hey, we've been talking about in our character designs. Items are they're based on strength per se, but do the items give you the strength? And I don't think we're going to go for that per se, but we've been talking a little bit about this idea that strength, and these are kind of the traditional RPG characters. And then we have these I don't know what we call these. There's like a middle ground here somewhere. I think it's sort of like maybe unit. And entities are like this idea of schedules. Is sort of what we're working on right now. We'll talk a little bit, and I think the unit sort of is that glue to the world. Really, right? This is the world glue. Can I? The world glue that sort of holds. So the entities will showcase a little bit of demo with this a little bit. They'll have schedules, so they'll have sleep. They'll have, which I guess we should use. Well, as a development talk, we use the we call it downtime right now. Then we have this work time. Then you have free time. We have chat time, and I think, yeah, sort of this this idea. Well, maybe this might be a better. Oh, you know what we should do here? Let me. I think I could do this more. Yeah, so it's they're all downtime, work time, free time. That's kind of we like to do a little bit more inclusive, a little bit more. I don't think that's what I want. I think I can actually get to here from there. Oh no, maybe not. Oh, there we go. But you're not separating? Why? Well, that's mean. I thought it would sort of be really cool and separate it out. Anyways, that's kind of what we're trying to go for. So, so yeah, so it's like this idea of, um, can you? Yeah, there we go. That's what I want. Oh no, never mind. It's just this idea that they have downtime. Is sort of they sleep, they work, and then they have free time and chat time. I should. I don't know. It's so difficult to say like what you should do. Um, but in terms of, so there's a game called Seeds of Resilience. It's actually really cool. So, maybe I'll get busted for copyright infringements, but you can sort of look at the first thing I noticed about this game is their world design is almost entirely like I didn't I never even this I just found about this game a couple days like yesterday, and it was like, so we can see the world design is really kind of similar to what we not in terms of the type of game, but interesting thing I want to talk a little bit about this sort of, it's hard to sort of showcase it here, but um, which is kind of, I think it's interesting, but it's not sort of what we're going for right now, especially since we have this concept of well, I think that's sort of like I think they have a really cool concept there where it's like, anyway, let's talk about what they're doing. You have like maybe this same sort of setup, but it's sort of linked to your production time, like how, and that's sort of like it. Like when you hire someone, you don't sit there and say, well, they're going to sleep for 8 hours, they're going to have all this, but I mean that's what the characters do, what the person is doing in the world, but you only are working with this work time, which is it's sort of this idea of like when you have a character in the game, they have and that's what the Seeds of Resilience. I think I want to get this correctly. Mostly, it's a big shout out to Seeds of Resilience to them. That, it's kind of doing a very similar. They're quite a bit further in their development path, but anyway, so they have this idea of like, oh, someone has 4 hours of work or 6 hours of work. Like if they sleep in a bed, they get more work time. And that's sort of like we're sort of. I don't think we're talking a little bit about that, which is maybe sort of we have to think about that a little bit in terms of down time is like this idea that there is 8 hours is sort of what we're kind of trying to do, which is kind of based on a 24 hours goal. Which I guess we're getting a little bit ahead here, but anyway, so we have 8 hours of downtime and then 16 hours of time. But one of the things too is like rarity is supposed to increase that downtime, or it's supposed to make it faster, which kind of it feeds this. It's kind of a problem because if we sort of have someone have 8 hours of downtime, but they sleep in a legendary bed, then maybe they only need 6 hours, which is still probably okay. I think maybe it's a balance we could have from 9 hours of sleep or 10 hours of sleep or something as a baseline, down to the 6 hours, which is kind of, I think 6 hours is sort of like, it's sort of not based on how you sleep right now, but it's sort of based on your age and stuff like that. But we might have to think about the rarity in this type of situation, which is just not really, which is, I don't, I'm not sure what, so I just want to put some here, dot, dot, dot. But yeah, so, and then, yeah, so then it's just talking a little bit about, how do we sort of take this idea of this unity and sort of put it into this this and this kind of expands it out a little bit right here. So we have this entity. I guess let's get to the demo since I'm sort of yammering myself. But we've been showing this a little bit, which kind of we haven't really made pretty. I think we've hopefully fixed a bug. There's a bug that if you start the character here, it's sort of something can go wrong and it won't load the world. And the world loads a little bit faster, which is kind of great, but it's like I think it's because the world size is we wanted to load it faster for testing. Anyway, so you can sort of see this. We have this sort of you can sort of oh, that's interesting. Oh, because of the yeah, we need this sort of piece right here with this blue selection. I need to find a better it's kind of this idea of the selection box here. Anyway, so this is our a little character here. And we sort of, oh, I think, yeah, we need speed time. Anyway, so we have this downtime. This is not the actual downtime. This is their sleep time right now. It's 100 ticks, as we talked about. There are 58 ticks, which is cool. But up here, this is the downtime. I guess they're sort of talking about the same thing, but this one is actually giving you the downtime in hours. So the person only slept basically 2 hours, which is about right because it's 20 ticks. We actually, I wasn't talking about showcasing code, but maybe we will. So yeah, let's, because I do want to talk a little bit about that as well. Um, Kind of really, that's definitely, so it's definitely the idea of like, the energy, the downtime, and then sort of this is their, this yellow bar is their sort of, they have a 5 tick cycle. Every 5 ticks, the game feels like, oh, hey, something, important could happen. There's, which when we talk about the tick system, but anyways, you can sort of this, in 20 ticks, I think it's 50, yeah, it's 15 ticks, my bad, 15 ticks. So in about 30 ticks is 2 hours. So, and that works out to 15 ticks times 8 is 120 ticks. So we should actually have 120 ticks of game time before the character will, should be the sleep time. And right, this was before it was kind of this 100 ticks, as in there's 400 ticks an hour, or 400 ticks, or sorry, and the 24-hour period of 400 ticks was 8 hours of that, or a quarter of that was 100 ticks. So we're changing that up quite a bit. We'll see some numbers here shortly, but so you can sort of see like there's this idea that they have these entities, they have these various. I'm still kind of improving this, which is probably what I will probably focus on quite a bit. Even though this doesn't like this scheduling doesn't actually help with my real schedule. And then we have this unit, which is working out really nicely, which is sort of like is the glue. Not the, well, it's the kind of the glue. And then we have this. We have this game entity character, which is what it's called now. Is the script glue. I don't know what you call it, but it's the idea is there's a script glue here. Which is kind of cool. Is that no? Yeah, that was the right way. Whew. Yeah. So the game. So this the entity sort of handles their. I also need to split off the entities. Kind of handle too much. I might. I don't know. It's getting tempting to sort of split this off into units and characters and entities and maybe people as well. I think there is a person SO. Yeah, I guess. Anyways, let's talk about some of this. But well, okay, sorry, I'm over the. So we're sort of kind of up in here in this economy and town, and that's sort of why the major changes. I think is this sort of like kind of this idea. We're talking about this Hamlet 18 plan, which is kind of where we're planning, but we're talking about this idea that in the adventure mode, or in the adventure, we have these 3 pillars of the dungeon, town, and character. I think is what kind of we're sort of reiterating this, but we also have this idea of the world, and as it relates to the nodes, which we have buildings, which we're getting to, and dungeons. Which is kind of this this world we're getting to, and you can see that it's the world's coming along very nicely in terms of getting and it's I think it's good, but it needs quite a bit of improvements. So we'll have to try to think of that. And anyways, and you can sort of see that there isn't any dungeons in this example. There isn't any items, and I think that's sort of what we're talking about. This major change is we're going to focus on the sort of social, fun aspect of the characters and the town first, because we think that's going to be the non-combat elements of the game. I think, which is kind of where it's just kind of where our focus has been for the last several iterations, several weeks, and so we want to sort of get this sort of at this point where, and we're not even sure like if we're going to get back to this. I think once we have this sort of selection, it's relatively easy to send this off to the unit control, and eventually I think he may not actually move right now. You can see the 5-tick timer is kicking off here. But anyway, so he'll, but that's sort of like the question in my mind now is like, when working on the entities and sort of their character and this sort of social town view, it's better in an RTS that I can look around, click on buildings, see what's happening in the building and various stuff like that. And then versus the adventure mode where it's like you're sort of like, oh, I have to run over to this town to the blacksmith and check out what he's working on, versus I can just be like, oh, okay, that's what the blacksmith is doing, or oh, that's what's happening in the tavern. So we're going to try to focus on the characters as the entities, and then the world. I think the world's getting quite a bit better in terms of what it wanted to do. We have to make a pretty major decision about how the nodes, we have this idea. The nodes right now are just these little Minecraft sort of 0.1 tiles that interact on this scaling, and there's a little bit of, I haven't noticed this bug before. I think it's because it's on the edge of the area. It always decides that it wants the edge to be C, and then this is here. And then this sort of puts this sort of land chunk, land generation here, which kind of needs to sort of say, hey, this is the area you can build your land pieces in and shift them around, however, whatever fits in there. But that's sort of a pretty high level concept. So we might have to put up with a few of these. Oh, there's another one over here, a few quirks here. I think it's partly because, I think the world generation starts here and then goes to here and then sort of says, oh, you can't do that because it has to. We talked about that quite a bit ago. But anyway, so how are we doing on time? I think we're pretty. I was kind of thought this was going to be a short video, and here it is, already 22 minutes. So let's quickly go over some of the code here. Let's see if I can Visual Studio to behave. It's been very frustrating. Just it doesn't want to sort of. It didn't do anything. Yay! It doesn't boot the files for some reason now. Anyway, so our time tick system is pretty much a kind of a pretty big iteration. So what we want to talk about is right here. Yeah. So this is sort of this idea I was talking about, that there's day ticks. There were 400, so it was like 400 divided by 4 is called the day quarter, and then sort of took this out and said, hey, well, what's 400 divided by 4? And that was 100 ticks. So it felt like, and that's part of that. So 400 ticks is 24 hours, right? Is sort of this. We think about this, and so 800 ticks is 8 hours, basically. But then we sort of got this idea down here. Well, what's in the days ticks? What's an hour, right? So if you take 400, you divide it by 24, you get this 16.67 seconds. So that's like, which is, I think it's kind of right now. It's like why it's about 15, because you kind of think about. But then we came up with this idea of 360. 360 is actually pretty amazing. So you take 360 divided by 12, and it's 30. Well, it's actually the year ticks divided by 12. But anyways, so it's like. It's actually really nice because you can take the year ticks as 360 and divide it by 12, and you can take the and you can divide it out pretty nicely. Would this actually work if you divide it by 12 and then divide it by? It wouldn't work out, but when it's too small, it doesn't work out. But 180 is actually per day divided by 24. Oh, that doesn't actually work out. Yeah, doesn't work out as much. But anyway, but what we're going to go with this number is 360. because that divided by 24 is 15 ticks. And then you also notice over here we have this idea of 720 ticks divided by 24, so it's 30 ticks. And that's sort of like this idea, like in the development, we're gonna speed up the day, but in the actual game we might slow it down to this 720 ticks, um, and then 360 is cool kind of too because you take 360 by 360. I thought there was a anyways, you get this nice year ticks. I thought there was a by 360. Oh, it's the 400. Okay, I see. My bad. At 400, at 360 was cool for 144,000 ticks in a year, but right now we're sort of in this idea of 360 times 360. Which gives us 129,000 ticks. So, and then you can sort of see the main, and a lot of this is sort of abstract out. This is sort of talking about the idea for developer, for the programming side of things, which is kind of what the focus of this. So it's 15 ticks an hour. And then it's actually, let's think about it, 15 ticks divided by 60 is about 0.25 ticks. Let's see, divided by 24 divided by 60. Yeah, 0.5. So right around under a tick, a quarter of a tick or half a tick is a minute. So every 3 minutes or every 2 minutes in the game is in action, which we think is like because in development it's like every second should be happening in the game, but we can't sort of get away with that because it's like we have way too much going on. Maybe in the far future we could simulate a world. That's kind of what we're talking about, this simulated world where it's like every second something happens, but we're sort of trying to get this idea that every tick in the game something's going to happen, and then based on the ticks the character does stuff. And I thought there was another piece of code I wanted to show. Maybe we'll look at the design over here and see where. I think I forgot where it was, but you can sort of see like this idea here of the 24 hours of the simulated world, which is we got ticks, hours, days, months, quarters, years, and then throughout the the history of the game, which is going to be pretty cool, I think. But yeah, I'm trying to think of. Well, I guess we could talk. Well, we might have. Let's show off the game entity character. I'm going back and forth on what the. Oops, come on. I know it's called game entity. Probably misspelling it. There we go. Yeah. So anyway, so we can see here that we have this entity SO, the person SO. Oh, and I also want to talk about the person a little bit, and then the game job. This is their current job, like what they're doing, and then so the unit is sort of where they're at. This is the world interaction piece. Where they're at in the world, what node they're on. This is their sort of this is their big social economic piece, which we need to split off. It's kind of it's basically all the, and then we have this their identifier, which, and then we have this is just a job. It's actually not part of this sort of anyway. So in the person SO, we sort of have created this new person SO. They have their just their first name, their last name, their gender, and then assigned is whether or not they're actually assigned into the game. And I think that's pretty much it. So, and then this comes out to their full name is sort of like, I think, do we have I don't think we have names in this current iteration of the game here. But that's where you get, that's Bob, Bob Moons, Sue, Sue Star. Actually, I think I could actually ask this person what their name is. Okay, yes, this is kind of a weird, I need to sort of match this system up with that system up there, but, yeah, so here's the, it says no unit, but they do actually have a unit. It's Kevin Rock. So you can see here that Kevin Rock is actually fed into the entity, the unit, and the person. And then the game, I don't think they have a job. Yeah, they don't have a job. So it's like just trying to say, hey, I don't have a job. But you're like, that's cool. But yeah, so that feeds into this, which you can actually look into the oh, well, um, where is it? Oh, it might be the Entity Factory. Yeah, here we go. It's the Entity Factory. Well, no, this. Oh, yeah. Oh no, it's okay. So okay, sorry, my bad. Sometimes I'll create a whole list of characters, but right now we're just trying to work with this one character. Basically to say, are we feeding in? And I don't think characters. Oh no, we do have. Oh, okay. The characters is the game entity characters. So that's the overarching. This, and then this is the pool that we have all these extra. It's just a pool member, which is actually kind of really crazy in terms of it's just a pool member right now. It's like wow, because then we just add the game entity character, we create all of this, like everything down to here in code, which is really cool. We still have NPC down here, which feeds in the entity right now. And then welcome stranger, and then we have this simple directed and interactive. So that's sort of like a piece of this. And then the entity is actually, I don't think there's anything about the entity, but you can look at just sort of like where they're at in the world and what they're doing is all part of that piece, which is actually working out really nicely. And that's kind of where the game is built on, is that you can, when you left click a character, it's like, oh, I'm that, such and such a place, and you right click over here, and he's like, okay, set the target to there, and he goes and interacts with that. So that's working out really nicely. I haven't changed that in such a long time. And then here you can see all our nodes. Our nodes are sort of like same off the simple pool. I think our simple pool is a little bit bigger because we create the node geo, and then we have. But then you can see like the tiles, which are kind of like just these little pieces of data, which are actually kind of, you can think of this as the Minecraft block for us, but it's just this tile piece of data that has the tile information. I don't think we can actually name it, because part of this you can see is the node SO. So this is the node, we kind of talked about this a lot, where the game objects, anyway, I get off track here. Anyway, so you can sort of see this idea that the person creates a person, and they give them this unique name, and every person in the game is going to have a unique name, which, we might have to start, adding in tons of different names to the characters. And partly it's like you're going to have to sort of, when you create a name as well, you're going to have to say, well, we might get away with that a little bit in the future, because you have like Micaiah Stevens the first, or Micaiah Stevens Senior or Junior, or something like that. So we might add some of that functionality later as we expand. But right now it's like we think that we can get away with just adding characters. So what's the major change that we've been talking about? I felt like we haven't really hit this sort of idea. We talked a little bit about the idea, right? Wow, did that disappear? I guess right here. We talked about the I thought there was a. Yeah, we talked I don't know. It's kind of like this idea of the adventure sort of. This is the game, per se, which is going to include these three pillars of the dungeons, towns, and characters. And we've been talking about dungeons a lot, and we're talking about the world a lot, but I think we can sort of see, like, we're trying to get away from the fact right now of this idea of dungeons and this complicated, very, larger game we want to build. And we're trying to focus on, mostly you can see right now, the focus has been this sort of idea of right here with the character itself, and that's not going to include any of the stats, items, or anything of the character. And it's mostly kind of the NPCs of the game and the non-combat interactions of the game. Is we really want to focus on that for the next little while, and sort of really build that system out, because combat and dungeons and all this stuff is really, out there, and there's a lot of people doing that, but I don't think there's a lot of people working on this sort of. There's a few games that you can think about that are like this, but then so then this once we get this sort of hammered out, I think, and really nicely put together, this whole sort of, then we can start adding in this sort of RPG elements, and then we can start adding in the dungeons and adding more things for the characters to do. But once we hammer out, I think we should really take a step back from even what we're doing here, and sort of talking about this idea. I guess it's not really talk about this really central idea. We've been talking a little bit about it, or internally about this idea that the entity is great, but it's like what we really need right now is to focus on the world, which I think the nodes, and sort of hammer out exactly how fast and how quick we can get a node out there, and then get a character, and then get that character to move across to that node, and we sort of the unit geo might be able to handle that, but we sort of need that. The unit geo shouldn't know anything about interactions with the world. That's another sort of higher level piece that tells it, sort of, hey, the person is trying to click somewhere, and that's sort of like, we need to sort of think about it in terms of that higher level system needs to be able to do it from the person, as in the game player, versus the NPC, versus and then had those two pieces talk to the unit geo, or talk to this sort of unit geo in a simplified way, and then the unit geo will know, oh hey, I'm in this current node, and this is how I get to here, and then those four things, the nodes, the units, not the characters, not the entities, but the units, and then have the NPC, which abstracted out, and the person abstracted out, to say, those two pieces combined. Because that's kind of one of the problems right now, is that when I tell someone to move forward, it's just the character moving forward. I think we actually have a dungeon. What is it? Dungeon RPG game. This has kind of been our little test project. Yeah, I think this should actually work. Ha ha! We'll be showing. Oh nope. Oh well, actually, this does work, but you can sort of. It's. Sorry, I think I can maybe. Sorry, it's kind of how I develop. I'm like, I don't care what it looks like. And you're like, well, the game people that play the game do. 0.25. It's just 0.5, and 0.5. Oh, one more. Excuse me. Pardon me. Yeah, there we go. So you can sort of see, this is really cool. This has been our kind of our node testing world. And a lot of this data is actually, like, if the null's here, and the key is over here, is this dungeon level. Let's see, and I think he'll actually do this as well. Oh, sorry. It doesn't really check for anything, but which is kind of really cool. And then you can sort of, oops, yeah, he doesn't really care about the. He's just, he's just like, can I move forward? Okay, that's sort of part of the problem too. A little bit is like, oh hey, I can just move forward. But you can see it's really nice, and I like the fact that it can really. He can swim. Oh, he can't, but you can really interact with the world and say exactly where he is. And this is actually telling you exactly what it's doing. It's kind of really nice. So, oh, yeah, and then sometimes he depends. He doesn't whether or not he should climb up. A lot of people are working on these climb systems. Like, hey, I'm going to jump to the ledge, and it's like, not in this RPG, but maybe I should. But anyway, so you can sort of see that the world. This is kind of the two pieces I'm talking about. Is this game? This is the RPG game dungeon controller, or we call it the dungeon controller right now. And he just says, "Hey, hit W to move forward." And that's what I want to talk about. Versus the fact that I'm here and I'm in this. Here, let me go to non-full screen, and then we can sort of show the. I wouldn't say it's the best way to show it, case it, but. Yeah, and then we in this view, we can actually go around and we're saying, hey, our character's right here, so you left click this, and I want to right click to here. No, left left click. I know it simulates. Anyways, I left click here and then I right click here, and then the character's like, oh, I need to move. I need to go from here to here. Versus W will just say, hey, I want to go. And W should actually, I think W at this point should just say, hey, I'm here and you want to go here. Sort of like I don't know if it's what kind of pattern that would be, but anyway, so that's kind of the idea here, is that we're sort of talking about this idea of sort of being a little bit more, focused on the social, interactive character world, and then could have, add this piece when we're ready for that sort of game piece. And I think this would add in, this sort of piece plus so many other things we're talking about would add it, jobs and various systems like that would add in a lot more depth and interaction to the game. And it's like as the player, you get to decide what the character you're controlling is doing. You could run them ragged, and they can run out of energy and they'll fall asleep on the floor, and you may not want that, but and we might do something different in the dungeon. Have a sleeping bag or some sort of, quick sleep or something, or some sort of system like that where it's like they're not as reliant on that energy. Plus, too, it's all based on energies. Right now, it's all based on energy. So, the better items, the better gear you have. Maybe you can get an item that ignores sleep or something. Anyway, so and then we're talking. So this is kind of the overarching view here, but we're going to sort of focus on the sort of core pieces. I think is sort of the idea right now, which I don't have a slide for that. But anyway, so that's I guess I've been jumping around a lot, but that's kind of the major change we're talking about. And then so how do we ship from that? I think once we get the dungeon character interacting with the world, is maybe we should focus on that first, and getting the dungeon and the interacting world back up. That might be a really cool idea. But it's also kind of been talking about this idea a little bit internally about, in the adventure mode, like just eliminate adventure mode and just focus on the RTS aspect, and not sort of eliminate but from the game, but sort of the focus of development, if it's going to be on entities and the schedule and what they're doing, needs to be an RTS sort of interactive world where I as the developer can interact with the world and see what it's doing in terms of what the characters are doing, their social interactions, all their stuff that and a lot of it is like, to do that, it's like, you saw where it's like, that's kind of how I do things. I'm not saying it's the best system, but what I do is I'm like, oh, hey, what's happening with, this, I want to look at a piece of this person's data. So I'll drill down into that person's data through here. Not through an interactive menu, which is it's going to come eventually for the users, but for me as a developer, it's like, and I put a lot of debug text and stuff like that a lot, but I'll delve into, oh, hey, I'm working at the unit level. I think we're actually pretty solid on this, so it's like, a lot of some of this NPC controlled, a lot of this sub data needs to be dragged out to somewhere, but we look at, oh, it's now Kevin Crystal, and this is where he's at, and that's the velocity of that. Oh wait, actually no, that's working right now, and then you can sort of see what he's doing. Why is he not showing functions? Is it the unit geo that will show the functions? Huh. I guess, because he's not ticking. Maybe? Anyway, so then I'm like, why are you not showing my functions? And maybe I get an error. And anyway, so it's pretty good. Hopefully, a pretty good explanation. So hopefully, we've got to get back to this sort of view, and this is kind of this has been my excellent view of, here's the nodes, here's the unit geo, and these are just test models, by the way. I should really highlight this. This tiny people from Poly Blacksmith has been my was testing out the scheduling system, and it's whether or not it's a space character, a person, or an RPG doesn't really matter to me. These are probably our characters a little bit. This is maybe this is how you start the game. Maybe, I don't know. uh, well, with like the ultimate, I'm just a normal Joe Blow walked into a portal. Anyways, they did a pretty good. It's the Final Fantasy, or not Final Fantasy, but that's the Ultima uh, storyline basically from Richard Garrett, which is kind of one of my icon people. Anyway, so we'll still have as the RPG sort of aspect of this of building, and I think that's sort of like once the node is sort of interacting with this node world, which will include we have I think all these pieces are working together really really nicely right now. Um, so we need to sort of clean that up and get that into a sort of like this is what we want. I think we're there. And then we want to focus on, and then the sort of, maybe we should sort of get that out the door, and then we can go to and start working on these sort of bigger systems. But I think over whatever we do, that's the main focus of this. Hopefully, has been to showcase that we are going to be start focusing on the as our development has been. Is that door? I guess it feels backwards. That's very distracted. But we're going to be start focusing in on the schedules and the characters and the interaction and the social and the non-combat systems because that's where we put our focus for the last 3 weeks. So we're going to keep that up and then sort of push towards the ship state. Anyways, my name has been Micaiah Stevens for Haven Studios. You can leave a comment. Sorry for the rambling. It's been a little bit less, more so now. But thanks very much. I think this is definitely a showcase of what's going on, and hopefully, gives you a really good insight into what we're thinking and how it's being developed and the progress of it. So, thanks very much. Have a great day.